You are tired of average. You want more out of life. You know you're capable of something greater. This show will help you become resilient in your home, at work, and in your community. Welcome to the Resilient Humans Podcast with your host, Kevin Wood. Welcome back to the Resilient Humans Podcast. And today I'm joined by a true expert in resilience and leadership. With over 25 years of experience as a leadership coach, speaker, and resiliency training expert, Beth Kennedy has dedicated her career to helping leaders develop resilience habits that fuel peak performance, maximize impact, and create positive workplace cultures. Through her training programs, she equips employees with the tools to navigate change, manage transitions, and stay engaged. Beth is also the co-author of a new book, Rethink Resilience, which is a powerful guide to building both personal and professional resilience. I'm truly excited to dive into her insights on what it truly takes to thrive in today's world. Beth, welcome to the show.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Great to be here.
So we were talking earlier, and I understand you're from Boston, which is an amazing city. What brought you to Boston in the first place?
So it's one of these stories where the honest truth is I always wanted to go to undergraduate college in Boston, and I didn't get accepted. I only applied to one school in Boston. So I went to undergrad in West Virginia, and then for graduate school, went to Boston. And there it is. Met my husband, and here we are.
And how long have you been there now?
I have been here, oh my goodness, over 30 years.
Oh,
Yeah, I have two
wow.
daughters in their 20s. Yeah,
That's awesome. Very
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
And you're obviously big into resilience, and we're on the Resilient Humans podcast. Usually I save this for the end, but I'm interested in your take on it, and I hope this sparks a deeper conversation. I'd like to know what your definition of resiliency is in your own words.
Yeah, great. So this is something I feel pretty passionate about. First, I always like to start with what it's not. Um, so I think we need to be careful that resilience is not about being able to dive our head under and do absolutely everything and anything till we end up what I call going down that burnout escalator. So to me, resilience is about having a tool set so that we can move forward, bounce back, but to realize that resilience is having ups and downs, being able to live our best life because depending on what's going on, we pull the different tools or resources,
That's very
which
cool.
connects to my model, which I think we'll get into later.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And how did you get into the field of resiliency in the first place?
So believe it or not, it goes back to my father. My dad was an entrepreneur and had his own business in New York City. And as a little girl, I would go, he actually owned a moving company. So I would spend a lot of time with him. He had the most incredible brand, and he had this gift of bringing out the best in people. Anywhere you would go, he just had this magic of asking questions, a curiosity. And I learned this as a young girl, but he also was a workaholic and really struggled from depression. So as a kid, I was trying to figure out, what is resilience? Because his business was super successful, but yet his health was struggling. He ended up dying at 66 years old. And I look back and I think, if he had the resources that I now bring to organizations, would he still be alive like my mom? So I questioned. I always thought what I always thought I knew what resilience was, but as I went through life, I realized I majored in psychology. One of my biggest internships was a company in New York City called Stress Care, working with executives that were too stressed out. And I realized my dad really created this career for me because I always wanted to help him, even as a little girl, and I couldn't, but I ended up studying psychology, getting my master's in human resource counseling. And now my entire business is on resilience with leaders
That's so cool.
and teams. Yeah.
If you could go back in time, having
Yes.
all of this knowledge that you have now, what would you tell your dad?
Oh my gosh. So, you know, he he was such a giver and again, made such a difference in every person's life. I can't even tell you the stories I heard at his funeral. But the thing I would tell him is something that we hear a lot, that, put your oxygen mask on first before you take care of others,
Hmm.
that you need to take care of your own well-being as part of your success, because no one else is going to take care of it for you. And he was out that door probably 5 a.m. every morning and home at 7 or 8 p.m. at night, missed the family vacations, but I will tell you, was the best dad ever, because his heart was so big. But his health can only take it, you can only go so far before it he died of a heart attack. So it ends up,
It
coming
catches
back
up
to get you. Yeah.
for sure. We
Yeah.
often hear these things, and you mentioned a few of them at the start. We hear
Yep.
things like leaders eat last and like take care of others first. Why is that such a prevalent concept in the business world?
So I think a lot of it has to do with our brain chemicals too, because when we are succeeding and doing great, we do get that great dopamine rush, and promotions are fun and it's exciting and it's great to have your career take off. And I think it's so easy to, especially now globally, we're on these videos, time zones. I work with clients that are in Europe and India and China and Japan, and the time zones, you could be on 5 a.m. to 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. And I make people really set boundaries, because if I didn't have them do that, they wouldn't do it. I think many of us are raised with this work ethic, and we have to be careful our work ethic doesn't get in the way of what it means. That word, I know we hear it a lot, to thrive, but what does it really mean to thrive and live a fulfilled life is just not accomplishing that to-do list and those work objectives.
It's so true.
Yeah.
And over the course, like I've recorded almost 140 of these episodes and interviewed a ton of people on their views of resiliency. And over those interviews, it's helped shape my own definition, which has evolved and changed over the course of the show. And the typical one that you'll hear, and especially from
Yeah.
entrepreneurs or business owners, is nose to the grindstone, work hard, sleep when you're dead. That's all the hard stuff. But
Yeah.
there's a other side to it, and I call it balanced resiliency. You need to have that other side of rest, recovery, vulnerability, compassion. So there's those soft sides to resiliency that oftentimes people forget about.
Yes, yes. And I like to use the word, instead of like work-life balance, like and the same with resiliency, I like to use work-life synergy. You
Mm,
know, if you get that synergy with well-being and career success, if you get that together, then you really feel that amazing fulfillment. And I've seen it with my clients, and they're so grateful, because they're like, wow, you can really have a super successful career and take really good care of yourself, which is so
it's true.
exciting, you
Yeah,
know?
it's a game changer once you realize
Yes,
that for
yes, it
sure.
really is. It really is.
So something you mentioned earlier, this is kind of a two-part question.
Okay.
You mentioned, working hard and can obviously lead to burnout. I'd like
Yeah.
to know how you view burnout or the things leading up to burnout. And
Yeah.
then how does resilience or building resiliency prevent that?
Good. Great, great question. So part of my interest in burnout comes back to me. Unfortunately, my first career was a school counselor in the Boston public schools. And when I landed that job after graduate school, I was like, this is my dream job. I will be retiring from this job. And one of the things I noticed the first few years was there were a lot of burned out teachers. So, what do I mean by burned out teachers? Well, kind of had a little bit of this like attitude where whatever, they left work right at the clock, 2 o'clock, they were in their cars, they were exhausted. And I was like, oh, right at, in my 20s, that would never be me, because I would never be teaching students or working with students and be that way. Well, year 7, I did not know what hit me. It was like getting hit by a train. It happened over a few months, but I was feeling exhausted, fatigued. This is the worst part. A little bit cynical, which is not part of my personality. But the worst part, and this is hard to actually admit out loud, is I became a clock watcher like the teachers. I'm like, is my day over yet? But I'm like, that can't be me. I'm from a family with a
Mhm.
really strong work ethic. I've got a positive attitude. You can do it. So I'm telling you, I kept on trying this positive self-talk. It wasn't working. And I remember in graduate school, I sat next to a woman named Anne Marie and said, Beth, if you ever need anything, call me. So I called her. She was the training manager of the Gillette company. And I had this talk with her, and she was like, you need to make a change. And I was like, oh, no. But anyway, I put, that statement one foot in front of the other. And I realized it was time for me to make a change. So it took me 2 years, even though my family says you never quit anything, I did a proper transition. And what I learned about burnout is I actually, my first book is called Career Recharge: 5 Strategies to Boost Resilience and Beat Burnout. So I did a lot of research on burnout. And what many people don't realize is there's actually 5 stages. So I was in about stage 2 or 3, but stage 1, believe it or not, is what they call the honeymoon stage. And that's when you're basically like a workaholic. You get that good adrenaline rush, you get the
Mm.
dopamine rush, you're working hard, but believe it or not, you're burning out because you're working so much, but you keep going. So I went through, I was in that honeymoon stage for probably the first 3 years. And then stage 2, you start to feel this feeling of chronic exhaustion. It's not just Monday morning. And then it gets a little bit deeper in stage 3. And stage 4 is when it starts affecting your mental health, and where I refer coaching clients to see for therapy and to get the help they need. And stage 5 is when you hit the wall. I describe it like running a marathon and you just can't go one step further. And I've actually had 2 clients in stage 5, and you need to usually leave your job and take a break, a pause.
Mm.
It was very hard for me to see this with 2 clients, but the great news about burnout is you can prevent it. And that's where, when I was working at Gillette, I ended up, my quick transition is I went from being a school counselor to starting a counseling and coaching program at the Gillette company. So I was there for 16 years. And the model that I use has 5 areas: well-being, self-awareness, brand, connection, and innovation. And thankfully, I've gotten this feedback over the years from my clients that focusing on those 5 areas actually prevents burnout. So you can have a super intense, incredible, high power career, but if you are focusing on those 5 factors of resilience, you can prevent burnout.
Can you, maybe you don't want to go into each one, but
Yeah.
is there,
Yeah.
are there, would you like to go into each one, or pick one or
Sure,
two
sure.
that,
How about I
yeah,
give you a few nuggets for each one?
that'd be great.
So, so well-being is often when we, physical, emotional, and spiritual health. So it's a lot of what we hear a lot about when we think about, making sure we're taking the little nature walk, or getting out, taking little mini exercise breaks, or getting into exercise habits. But it's also, we know, the rest, all those kind of things we've been hearing a lot since the pandemic. So that's that area of well-being. Self-awareness is your why. So why do you get up in the morning? What's that purpose? And I think I just want to mention this to people listening. We don't need necessarily have to have this huge, strong purpose in our career every day. Sometimes your purpose can be just being kind to that person, your neighbor. Like, I think the why is your big why. So I just think that's important, because sometimes people leave their careers because they feel like, oh, I'm supposed to have this like really deep purpose. So purpose is kind of how we show up every day. The other piece of self-awareness is our mindset, having a growth mindset. So, are we adaptable? Are we flexible? And then the third is something that I feel strongly about, is how are we flexing our personality type? So there's lots of assessments out there. It doesn't matter which one you use, but are you aware of how you're showing up and how you flex to connect with others? Because that's huge for resilience and moving forward. The third area is brand. And you don't hear this a lot in resiliency models, but over my work over many years, if you think about some of these organizations that are super successful, um, you see a logo or you see an advertisement and you're like, wow, like I'm just going to throw out Trader Joe's for anyone that's knows Trader Joe's. You go in there and you can feel the brand, you can feel the customer service, you can feel. So the brand is, what are your strengths? What's the impact you make daily? And then the third part is really important. What's the reputation you want? And you just think about how the world of work would be so different if everyone thought about their brand. Because it's not so much whether we're, you know, virtual or in person, but what's the impact you're making? So I like to dive in deep with that with my clients. And then the fourth area is connection. So one of my mentors is a famous author who's passed away. Her name is Barbara Sher, Sher. Some people may be familiar with a lot of her career books, but her famous quote is isolation is the dream killer.
Mhm.
So I have all my clients develop a connection plan. So I would encourage people on this call. The three things I have people think about for connection is group A are your allies. So those are, who are the friends, who are the past people you worked with that fill your energy bucket? You write down that list. And then group B is, who are the influencers? Who are those people that maybe you're at meetings with that you'd like to get to know a little bit more, or maybe past managers or professors? You write down that list. And then group C is, who are your champions? So, for example, when I was going through my career, my dad was a huge champion. This woman, Anne Marie, was a champion. So you write down your champions. And then how do you make this work? The first of every month, you put into your calendar, you have it, the alarm go off, and you connect with one person from each of those three areas. So this way you keep your connections going throughout your, every month, not just when unfortunately you lose your job or. So that's connection. And then the last one is innovation. So, and my definition of innovation is a little bit different. It's not just what you're doing for your career, it's what you're doing for your personal life. So, for example, hey, is there a new exercise you want to try? Or is there a new, maybe you've been thinking about joining that gym? Innovation is anything new you're going to add to help you have a better life. So it's not just professionally, it's personally. So that's a little
That's so
bit from
cool.
all five areas. I do want to share too that I have a resilience benchmark that anyone can take for free. That's available on my website too. And it
Cool.
says you in all those five areas.
And I'll put the link in our show notes so that people can just
Okay,
click
great.
and go to it. So that's awesome.
Great.
I appreciate that. So thank you very much. One of the words you mentioned, I believe it was in the brand component or the brand spot, was the
Yeah.
word impact.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what you mean by that?
Yes. So what I mean by impact is when you think about, and I'm just going to focus on your career at one first. When you think about your career, what is the difference you want to make? So, one of the reasons why people do go down that, I call it going down the burnout escalator, is because sometimes they are in a career or in their personal life, they're not following their purpose or they're not making the impact they want or need. So, just to share from my own personal example, why did I get burned out when as a school counselor, that job fit my values? So according to traditional career development, I should just have been thriving. But you know what it was? I had a certain impact that I needed to make with those students. And the schools were under such chaos and stress that honestly, there were days where I would be working with a student, I wouldn't see him again for 3 weeks. Then another student I wouldn't see for 4 weeks. And I realized I'm a person that I need to see progress, I need to see
Mm,
impact. And when I ended up finding this field of leadership and career coaching, it was like all the dots connected because for me, I was getting that impact. So it's something, something for listeners to think about in their own careers. Is the culture they're working in, is it the right fit for them to make an impact? Because
love
that's
that.
the other thing is just because you might have a specific, whether you're a lawyer or a doctor or a car repair person, does that environment help you make that impact you want to make?
So I was a former teacher before owning the gym.
Oh
I
my gosh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I taught in the school district here for 5 years, and I had that exact same feeling. Like I couldn't make the impact that I wanted to with the time that I had and the constraints that were put around me. It was very challenging. And so then I would take my own time, like the breaks and lunch hour, and try to make even more impact. And that just created even more pressure and stress around it because there was no alone time. Like I couldn't get a break. It was the second I walked through the door until the second I left at the end of the day, which often wasn't till much later because I was also coaching teams as well. So I get home at 9 o'clock at night only to restart that whole process again. Now I know that I've had individual impacts because former students have told me so. But
Yeah,
it's when you're in the moment, you don't really see it or feel it. And so for
no,
me, I left that profession to start a business that can have even more impact for even more people.
right. Oh, that is so interesting that you had the similar experience. And
Yeah,
it's
a
so,
lot of teachers do.
yeah,
It's the way it works now.
yeah. And Kevin, it's so interesting because I did a similar why I was working there. I said, well, there's got to be a way I can make enough more of a difference. So I started a side hustle and I started another company called Boston Peacemakers. And and I was like, I'm going to do that. And I tried that and I'm like, I still can't make the impact. So it is,
Mhm.
you just start pulling out all these strings, you know.
For
But
sure.
I do want to add a really important resilience piece is going back to asking for help and connection because if it was so important that I reached out to that woman Amory who gave me her time and her support. So I just think it's so important when you're struggling not to be in this place alone.
Where does so you are a coach yourself. Where do you
Yes.
see that as part of, is that part of the connection as well?
Yeah, so for me it's interesting. I feel like of the five anchors, connection is one of the most I don't want to say the important, but it's so important to not
Mm,
only preventing burnout but keeping you resilient because I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Harvard Grant study, which is it's one of the longest longitudinal studies ever in the world. It started in 1938 in Boston. Um, it has been interviewing and studying individuals since that time and trying to find out what really keeps people. They use the word happy and content. And one of the interesting things about this study is they found that the number one factor for people that are thriving and aging healthy is connection. So not only does it help prevent burnout, but I believe that in your career that it will also enhance productivity. And if we look at what's going on now with the organizations that are really thriving, you know, with all those pulse studies, it's the organizations where people feel valued and trust. So it goes back to this idea of how important connection is.
okay. I have so many things going through my head right now. One, obviously, COVID was detrimental to the connection piece
Yes,
because everybody was isolated. And I feel like isolation is one of the main predictors of anxiety and depression.
yes,
Like that's
yes,
that's one side of it. The other side is that we have this, it's like a mirage. It's not real, but this image that social media keeps us connected when in fact it's really not, because it's not real. It's like a fake
right,
connection. So can
right.
you talk on either of those 2 points and how that
Yeah,
how that
so
links with it?
yeah, it's interesting because this comes up a lot with leaders, with, you know, Beth, how do I keep a team, you know, this, you know, we're hearing this word now, engagement more than ever. How do I
Mm.
keep this team engaged when people go in 1 day a week, 2 days a week, or now we have virtual teams? And one of the things that I really emphasize is, and I know this is hard, but especially for organizations, is you need to figure out a way to bring people together. And even if it's once a year that you could figure out a way to fly people in. But the other thing I think is so important is going back to, and again, it's a word used a lot, but it's so important, authentic communication. So for all these meetings, all these Zoom Teams meetings, are people really checking in with how people are doing or just how is everyone? Um,
Mm.
my husband works for a large company, and I give his manager so much credit because his manager runs once a week. He calls it stretch and flex. They all get online for 15 minutes. The manager takes them all through a bunch of exercises. They are laughing, they are having so much fun. So I do think, we have to think a little bit outside the box. Virtual is wonderful, but how do we really build that word trust, that, really get to know people? And then I think the social media for all of us is one of those things I think we all have to be careful about. And, I actually think setting time limits. Some of
Yep.
it, I'm a big LinkedIn person, and I find it's fabulous. It's really helped my brand and clients find me. But again, for my field, it works. It's been excellent. Some of the other tools, I feel like you can get down this yellow brick road where you're not sure where it's going to go. So I think it's like everything. I do think everything has a positive and a negative. And again, that word synergy. How do we use these tools so that we can have the best life, career, personal, but also that word fulfillment. And like you said, that loneliness being such a serious issue. Again, back to that connection plan, really thinking about the two things that I think are so important is people that fill your energy bucket and staying away from the people. I call them, in my book, the energy vampires. If people don't ask you about yourself, there's something there's like a red flag we need to pay attention to.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
When you talk about your five anchors and you
Yep.
have people do that benchmark or the assessment, do you
Yep.
find that there's one or maybe two that people kind of score low on or that they have a harder time with?
Yes, it's so interesting because I just did a LinkedIn post on this. I just did a webinar for the Leadership Institute in the UK 2 weeks ago. And the overwhelming response, believe it or not, this surprises everyone. Number one was still well-being.
I was okay. So I had in my head, I was like, I'm gonna guess in my head to see what it is. I'm gonna guess it's that one.
So
Yeah.
even though there's been all these initiatives at work, all these different, you can name them all. When people are honest with me, they still say, Beth, it's hard for me to prioritize whether it's the exercise or if I'm trying to do a meditation practice or a mindfulness. Um, and do you want to guess what the second one is? And this is kind of my sample size for my clients. So it's between self-awareness, brand connection, or innovation. What do you think the second most challenging is?
I'm gonna
I know
say
it's
connection.
yes, it's connection.
Yeah.
And one of the exciting things is, so what I do with my clients is I have them take the assessment again at 3 months and then again at 6 months. Those two areas, it is so easy to enhance by, again, spending, I call it the Friday Five, taking 5 minutes every Friday to think about, okay, what can I do the next week for those? What's little that I can do for my well being and what's little that I can do for my connection? And it's even with connection, it's so fun. Even just sending someone a text message produces
Yes.
those good brain chemicals. So
Yep.
listening to podcasts, that's why these are booming. How great is it? You can be going for a walk and listening to a podcast. Or for me, I'm an elliptical person. So every week I'm listening to all the different podcasts. So yeah.
I remember I did I guess it was a workshop, but it was kind of like a summit. And there was a bunch of different speakers. And one of them, the whole theme of the summit was impact. That was kind of like the key token word. And during the guy's presentation, he said, "All right, everybody get out your phones because I know you all have them, and I want you to write a quick note, whether it's an email, text, a message, doesn't matter, to one person that has impacted you the most, and just tell them that." Man, it felt good. It felt
Yeah.
good just to hit send, regardless of if they replied. That didn't matter. What mattered was that you hit send and you got that out of you. And then I actually took that a step further and I thought about three people that impacted my life the most growing up, that made me who I am today. And I actually wrote them handwritten notes and mailed them to them. And it just felt good to write that out.
I
They had
love
an
that.
impact on me, and I wanted them to know that.
I love that. I have a leader. He's a founder of a company. And one of the things that he has shared with me is the power of the word thank you.
Mm,
And
yep.
I just love that we spend time talking about in an organization, how can you thank others authentically so that they can feel like they're valued? Because that word is way more powerful than giving somebody money, which is
Yep.
unbelievable.
Yep. So I'm going to
So,
say this
yeah,
now to everybody
yeah.
listening now. That's your homework for me, is that you're going to send a message, write a note, an email, whatever it is, and just say thank you to somebody for something that they've done for you. Um, that's homework number one.
I
And
love
then
it.
Beth, I'd like to ask you the same question. If you could give one piece of advice to our listeners on how to become more resilient, what would that be? What could they actually go out and do after listening to this?
One thing I think I would love everyone to think about is this idea of your brand. And I asked someone this question this morning. What are your top three strengths? And how do you use them in your career? And if you don't, how can you get them more in your personal life? Because we all know there's so much research about strengths, but often we don't think about, wow, am I using them? And if I'm not, how can I use them either in volunteer work or talking
Mm,
to a manager to be able to get more of that into your career? Because that's what really helps us thrive and be resilient. It's just not doing anything. So,
amazing.
yeah.
Beth, before we sign off, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I think the only thing I would love to share is if you are listening and you're on LinkedIn, please connect with me. It's Beth, and my maiden name is Benatti, the same as my resiliency model, Bennatti Kennedy. And let me know you were on Kevin's show because I love to get feedback. Always interested in feedback. That's an important part of resiliency. And the other thing I want to encourage everyone is to take the benchmark. During the pandemic, I decided it used to only be offered in my career recharge classes. And I wanted to just put it out to the universe because I think all of us need a chance to kind of assess where we are so we can make little small goals in resiliency. Because I think the world right now, we need to be resilient, but we also need to figure out a way for ourselves to thrive and feel better about what we're doing.
I love it. And your anchors are an awesome start for a lot of people. So thank you for sharing those. Again, I'll link your resources in the show notes. So if people want to go and click through, they can get to it.
Great. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you so much for coming on, Beth, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with others or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest episodes, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.